you're looking to dive into topics on how to live a happier, healthier, more fit and long lifespan, then you've come to the right podcast. Living the Dream with me, Coach Damian Evans. Together, we will explore the topics on all things health, fitness, and wellness. Together, we will be lifelong learners on this journey to living the ultimate dream. What up, Dream Team? Coach D here, coming at you from beautiful, sunny San Diego. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing why foot health is so important and why I believe you should wear shoes as quote unquote minimally as possible. We live in a world today where people line up for days to grab the newest pair of Jordans, and where we have the designered high heel shoes on the red carpet in which experts talk about them in every single little detail, where you're looked at it as a weirdo if you prefer to walk barefoot in the park, or even other instances where you get turned away from fancy restaurants if you're not wearing the right pair of footwear. I mean, we have had our feet stuffed into shoes since the moment we could walk. But is this a good thing? And what might be some of the long-term ramifications that may not have been considered by Bill Bowerman and Phil Knight when they created the first Nike shoe in the 1960s? Or when the Greenbergs created those super cushioned Skechers shoes in the 1990s? Today, we're going to take a close look at the history of footwear and how it got to where it is today. We're then going to explore how wearing footwear from the time of infancy until the present day may actually, and spoiler alert, actually is changing our biomechanics and in turn, our entire skeletal structure. We will also look at how footwear is designed to help with pain and physical ailments and how it may in fact be just a cast or a crutch that could be doing more harm than good in the long term. And of course, we always want to leave you with some tangible, actionable items that will help you move and walk in the right direction, living the most optimal, natural, strong-footed dream life you possibly can. But before we get into the topic of the day, I want to start by thanking the sponsor of this podcast. The sponsors of this podcast are Lululemon. Lululemon has some of the best athletic wear for both females and males, and I pretty much only wear Lululemon. The quality of material and durability and breathability are perfect for my active life. Another one of our sponsors is Dirt Food. Healing and delicious superfoods made by hand and made with love. Dirt Food was created by a local San Diego friend of mine who was going through her battle of cancer and was looking for cancer-fighting superfoods to help her defeat the two different types of cancer that she had. So her and her team created this superfood granola that she makes by hand in her kitchen, and she makes it with love. Visit eatdirtfood.com and use the discount code DirtyDamien for 10% off. That's DIRTYDAMIEN for 10% off your entire order. That's eatdirtfood.com. And this week's 5-star review comes from Jess Breezy. Jess Breezy says, I love this podcast. Lots to learn, great topics, and Coach D really delivers the info in an easy to understand and comprehensive way. Thank you so much, Jess, for your support and your kind words, and for taking the time to leave that awesome review. It really means the world to me. If the rest of you could do me a favor, if you haven't already, while you're listening to this episode, if you haven't subscribed yet, please take a second just to hit that subscribe button to this podcast and then scroll down and leave me a 5-star review if you feel that I've earned it. I read every single one and I love and appreciate the feedback. And now, on to the topic of the day. All right, team, I am super excited about this topic today. I want to start off by doing a little dive into the history of footwear, where it all started and how it evolved to what it is now with all the different shoe brands out there. If we could think back to our caveman ancestors and what they were doing, this is kind of what I picture probably happened. I'm sure somewhere along the line they were walking through really rough terrain and they considered, well, shoot, I can't really move that fast over these sharp objects. And I just let that large animal get away, and now I don't have dinner tonight. If only I had something that could protect the bottom of my foot from all that sharp stuff. I could then possibly be able to chase my meals down faster and more successfully. And then they probably strapped some like bark or something to the bottom of their feet, and with some like plant rope stuff, they tied it to their foot. And then their neighborhood cavemen saw them and was like, dang, Grok has some really sweet looking foot protectors on. I want some of that. And then fast forward thousands of years and then here we are today. Well, that's how I personally envision it happening, but let's actually look at a recorded history of the shoe. According to the dictionary, the shoe is an outer covering of the human foot, typically having a thick or stiff sole with an attached heel and an upper part of lighter material such as leather. The usage of footwear started super early. Scientists have inferred from observing the reduced thickness of the smaller toes, which they think could result from the usage of footwear, from as far back as 40,000 to 26,000 years ago. That's when they believe the first usage of footwear started. But since back then all footwear would have been made of perishable materials that biodegrade over time, of course no surviving footwear has been found from that time period. However, the oldest surviving footwear ever discovered is actually really super close to us over here on the West Coast in the USA. And my home state of Oregon, in Fort Rock, Oregon, they discovered a pair of sandals. These sandals were made from the bark of a sagebrush shrub. And with radiocarbon dating, they were able to show that this was about 10,000-year-old pair of sandals. And if you looked at these hideous sandals, you could probably tell that they were definitely for function and not for style. Fast forwarding a little bit from 10,000 years ago to 5,500 years ago, they found a perfectly intact cowhide shoe filled with cushioned grass in the country of Armenia, which can still be seen. These shoes can still be seen in the history of Armenia's museum today. And that's a high quality shoe to be able to have lasted this long. My shoes only last like 7 months, but you know what I'm saying. Now, you may think that flip-flops are a fairly new invention, but you'd be extremely incorrect. Because dating back to the ancient Egyptian times, there are actual hieroglyphics showing people wearing a form of flip-flop sandals etched into stone from 4000 BC. The Egyptian flip-flops were made from papyrus, papyrus, and palm leaves. There were also leather flip-flops discovered in the tombs of Egyptians. However, it is most important to note that most people in ancient times did not wear shoes, as apparently they were seen as quote-unquote unnecessary, which is going to be a common theme in today's podcast. This is a pretty consistent with most of the history of the Greek world as well. It is said that the first marathon runner in Greece who ran that 26.2 miles did it completely barefoot, and some think that even Alexander the Great conquered most of the known world with an army full of barefoot soldiers. Now that's what I'm talking about. Now, when the Romans trampled the Greeks, and there's a pun intended there, trampled, this all changed. Romans thought that running around barefoot was the wrong way to operate. It was too unsophisticated, and to be barefoot everywhere was kind of like, let's leave that more for the savages. In the Roman times, clothing was a symbol of power and wealth, and footwear came right along with that. No civilized person would go around running around without shoes. Only the slaves would go around barefoot. There were many types of footwear from here on out. Fast forward to the Renaissance era and the 15th century. There was a new shoe called the Chopin. Chopins were ridiculously high platform shoes, which were super popular among women in Venice, Italy, all throughout the Renaissance period. These shoes could be as high as 20 inches. Could you imagine walking around with these platform shoes that were almost 2 feet tall? They did this because the height was an indicator of power and prestige. So they would wear these really long dresses that would cover these platform shoes, and it would just make them look 2 feet taller. So this is where the term, I don't know if you ever heard well-heeled came from. That person is so well-heeled. It's because they wore these huge heels as a symbol of status and power. Now, in the late 1700s, heels fell out of style for men and were mostly considered a feminine style of footwear. And something cool that I found out while researching the history of shoes is the famed red bottom Louis Vuittons have become one of the most iconic fashion items in the 21st century. Tons of celebrities and pop stars rep the stylish Louis Vuittons on the runway carpets and then even rap about them in music videos to show signs of status and wealth. But red bottom shoes are actually derived from the past. They were introduced to the French court in 1673 by King Louis XIV. Louis XIV. And he only allowed people within his close circle of noble women and men to wear red bottom shoes, clearly marking their status of nobility and royalty. Now, it didn't take long for this trend to catch on in other European countries, and soon it caught on that red bottoms was a sign of wealth and privilege, as it has continued all the way until present day, it seems, right? Super interesting. Moving back to something that I'm more familiar with, let's talk about what a lot of us wear for fitness, and that's the sneakers. The earliest sneakers was the plimsoll. Now, plimsolls were developed in the 18th century, and their design was super simple, almost kind of like a slipper. The soles were made of rubber, and the tops were simply canvas fabric. They were originally designed for the British Navy to help soldiers keep their grip on the slippery decks of battleships. It's so cool to think that LeBron James can run down the courts today, making quick movements on the slick basketball courts because someone invented these shoes for sea-bearing soldiers to not slide overboard. However, these plimsolls soon became popular by wealthy people who played tennis because it helped them navigate the courts with more dexterity. So tennis was super popular with the higher class, and this is why sneakers are also referred to as, tennis shoes. Then the US decided to make a non-Navy version of these shoes and were able to mass produce them with the growing factory manufacturing types of ways that were becoming more prominent as technology advanced. They came out with a brand new shoe about 100 years ago called Keds, Keds. You might have heard of them before, and maybe one of your grandparents still has a pair. The same year that Keds came out, a guy named Marquise Mills Converse created a similar shoe strictly for the sport of basketball. Can you guess what that shoe was called? Oh yeah, Converse All-Stars. Then a few years later, a man named Adolf Dassler created a sneaker that would go global. His company was called Adidas. And his brother Rudolf Dassler, he created and founded Puma. I guess this family really loved athletic footwear. Now, a cool history side note was that before these two brothers started their own company, they were actually in business together. Adolf, the younger brother, was the shoe designer, and Rudolf, the older brother, focused mostly on the business side of things. Their company was called the Dassler Sports Shoe Company. Not really quite as catchy as Adidas or Puma, but they were all absolutely genius in how they grew their business. They approached a track athlete star named Jesse Owens in the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin, and they gave him a suitcase of spike shoes that they had designed. He competed in them, and guess what? He ended up winning 4 gold medals, and this was all while wearing these cleats. So that pretty much put these Dassler brothers on the map. But after some tension arose between the brothers, they split ways and created 2 huge behemoth companies who still do fairly well today. Now, even though Keds, Converse, Adidas, and Pumas were the first to hit the sneaker game, there was one company, again from Oregon, that currently takes the top spot in the sneaker industry with a brand value of $15 billion. Can you guess who it is? Ding, ding, ding. Yep, easy answer. The swoosh company itself, Nike. Nike was founded by a track and field athlete and coach partnership that was first called the Blue Ribbon Sports. This was back in 1964. Now, Nike did pretty well for itself for the next couple decades, but they really hit their stride when they partnered with one of the most famous and well-known athletes in the world. 1984, this was the year. Who was the athlete? One of the people that I looked to as a hero back in the day, yes, it was Mr. Michael Jordan. Fast forward over 3.5 decades later, the Jordan brand is absolutely on another level compared to almost all other brands. He even just came out with a hyper-adaptive, self-lacing shoe that they call the EARL, E-A-R-L. It stands for Electric Adaptable Reaction Lacing. This shoe actually connects to your phone, and it automatically laces and forms to your foot with the touch of a button on your phone. Like, what? From the sandals of Fort Rock, Oregon, made from bark, to an artificial intelligence shoe that forms to your foot just by using your phone? Man, we sure have come a long way. And it's going to be insane what they come up with in the future as technology advances even more. So now that we can see the path of the history of footwear, let's discuss a little bit about the evolution of the human foot from infancy to adulthood based on the types of footwear we form around our feet. This is going to give us a huge foundation, no pun intended, to explore what happens if our feet become dysfunctional and what that can do to the entire rest of our skeletal and muscular system. And then we can go into what happens when you have strong, healthy feet that you can stand on, and what that can do for your everyday life when it comes to movement, performance, injuries, pain management, and overall quality of life. So podiatry is a $5 billion industry. A majority of Americans will experience significant foot pain at some point in their lives, and up to as many as 10% of us are going to experience inflammation on the rubber band-like area on the arch of our foot, which is also referred to as as plantar fasciitis. Do we know why, though? Weren't humans evolved to walk long distances? And isn't walking upright on two legs the biggest thing that distinguished our species from other primates? So why hasn't natural selection selected a less injury-prone foot design for us? Some theories as to why we have so many foot problems are that we actually evolved to walk barefoot out in nature over the soft, amazing earth. But now that we have turned our foot design into something much more different than our ancestors by shoving our feet into these big, soft, cushioned tennis shoes, meanwhile, our bones and joints of the foot take a beating from walking and standing on super hard surfaces in crazy, uncomfortable shoes like high heels. And this is exactly what I believed, and I still believe is, for the most part, the culprit of a lot of our ailments when it comes to the aches and pains and problems with physical performance. We are built on this foundation, your feet, and it stems from the ground up. However, some researchers believe these issues have been accumulating for much longer than when those Keds, Converse, Pumas, and Adidas and Nike shoes all came into the game. Anthropologists who studied ancient skeletons have discovered foot problems and osteoarthritis issues, as well as compression fractures in foot bones since way back in the times of fossil records, long before those sandals in Fort Rock, Oregon were thought to have been created. These ancient feet had flat arches that most likely point to foot pain. And this is millions of years ago. Anthropologist Jeremy De Silva studies human foot evolution, and he believes that the foot has a less than optimal design. But I always thought that evolution meant that most optimal designs win out over long periods of time. But De Silva says the foot is essentially held together with, quote, paper clips and duct tape. And when you look at a foot put together on a skeleton, along with all the ligaments and soft tissue, it actually kind of does look like a bunch of just tiny bones held together with a very accurate description of paper clips and duct tape. Think about this. 25%, 1/4 of the number of bones in the body, are located in your 2 feet. Small bones that have many, many ligaments holding them in place. And I look at it this way. If we have one of those skeletons in our science teacher had in class, and if it's standing in the corner so that you could refer to it anatomically, and we were to ask you to take that skeleton apart and put it back together, the feet would be the most annoying and challenging part of that task of trying to put that skeleton back together. And then, of course, the hands, and then everything else seems like it would be pretty easy to be able to assemble. Now, I know this is a little controversial, but if we follow the science-based idea that humans evolved from apes, our primate ancestors spent most of our time in trees. So that means that their feet were originally designed to use to climb and grasp things like limbs. But 4 million years ago, or earlier, some apes started walking on 2 feet. Experts haven't agreed on why they started doing this, but some think that it was a more efficient way to travel for food when those trees ran out of sustaining nutrients. Or maybe it was to enable persistent tracking of large animal prey, so they could chase this animal down, tire it out until it overheated and just collapsed from exhaustion, so that the human could take down like a large elephant or a deer or an antelope or whatever was running around back then, and they could kill it and have a huge feast. I should probably just ask my dad what it was like. He seems to be old enough to be able to know why we started walking on 2 legs. Just kidding, Dad. I only say that because I know he listens to every single episode. I love you. All right, whatever the reason is, bipedalism is the defining trait of humans. And going bipedal meant we had to do some painful anatomical trade offs, including everything from where the spine attaches to the skull, to the angle of the femurs, and of course to the shape of our feet that we see today. Now, if we talk mechanics of the foot is a propulsive lever. It needs to be stiff enough that we can push off the ground and propel ourselves forward. But it also needs to be elastic enough to store the mechanical energy that is generated every time the foot strikes the ground. That's how, if you take engineers who make prosthetic legs for amputees, you'll see the design. It's kind of like a C shape. It's a C-shaped bouncing looking blade. So if you search on Google right now, if you go into your phone and you search Olympic runner prosthetic leg, you'll see exactly what I mean. It's this like little spring C-shaped looking thing. But the human foot looks nothing like that. We have 26 bones in each of our feet, along with 33 joints each, and over 100 muscles and tendons and ligaments holding it all together. That's because it was built for grasping. All those joints let it flex, which means that it's not exactly rigid enough for us to have that propulsion we need to match the sleek mechanical design of these prosthetic blades. So it's almost like we're compromising on being able to grip for being able to propel. Here's the issue. We don't grip with our feet anymore. I mean, I kind of like to pinch people with my toes from time to time because I'm weird, but tell me the last time you grasped anything with your foot, except for maybe when you grab your underwear on the floor and then you flick it up into your hand. And don't you dare lie to me and say that you've never done that. But I digress. So here's what we had to change. Back when we were climbers, our big toe was actually used like an opposable thumb, like on our hand. But in order to make our foot more rigid, it became shorter and then stiffer, and then it went right in line with the other toes. And as we developed arches to absorb the force of impact each time our foot hit the ground, our ligaments got thicker to help hold all these bones in place. And bipedal locomotion is a complex engineering puzzle that scientists have been working on for decades. And in the case of the human foot, you can see natural selection is still in what they call the early design phase. So we're still kind of evolving from that grasp to now only strictly needing it for locomotion. But if you look at the foot of an ostrich, this is the foot from the natural world that resembles the prosthetic blades that were designed for running on 2 feet. However, birds have a huge bipedal head start when it comes to evolution. If you look at their ancestors, which are said to be the dinosaurs like the T-Rexes, they have been bipedal for over 230 million years. 230 million years, whereas we have only been bipedal for about 5 million years. That's a massive head start when it comes to evolution of the body. And if we go back to what expert De Silva believes, he says that in natural selection, we are not choosing from an endless menu of options. Rather, it's a constant series of tiny modifications to the original design. So in our case, it's slowly modified from our feet being able to do these flexible, graspy hand type things to more rigid propulsive levers, which we're in right now, which left us super vulnerable to aches and pains. But considering our feet are modified ape hands, they do a pretty darn good job. And seeing as we are the most successful primate, actually the most successful mammal, well, arguably the most successful species on the planet, I guess we could say that it's a pretty good compromise, I guess. So let's move on to the muscles, bones, and structure of the foot. Now, I'm going to take a few minutes to describe the anatomy of the foot because I believe it's going to give us a better visual picture of the anatomy, and we can truly understand what happens when we wear incorrect footwear, and then exactly what that means as we move up the kinetic chain towards the ankles, the knees, the hips, the low back, and beyond. So if you're unable to visualize what I'm talking about here, pause this episode, and I'm going to include a YouTube video where you can actually watch exactly what I'm talking about here. It's a nice short clip, probably like 5 minutes or so. And if we look at the anatomy of the foot, we can then slowly talk about the injuries and how we can kind of strengthen the muscles of the foot. So let's start from the ankle, moving all the way down to the toes. So if you look at your two leg bones, you have your larger tibia and your smaller fibula, and they all end at the ankle. And there's this nice large round-shaped bone called the talus that locks the two leg bones together. This joint is referred to as the only mortise and tenon joint in the human body, mortise and tenon joint. This type of structure is well known to carpenters and craftsmen who use this shape from anything to furniture all the way up to super large buildings. And they use this structure because it is extremely stable, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you think about our body as one tall building with two legs, the joint right here is where our foundation is, our feet. And that's connected to this huge tower and starts with our lower legs all the way up to the top of our head. If this joint wasn't super stable, think about what that would do moving all the way up the kinetic chain. It wouldn't make sense. So if we move from that talus bone and the two legs that it holds together, the two leg bones that it holds together, if you move down right underneath the talus bone, there's this other round shaped bone called the calcaneus. And you might have heard about this one. This is often referred to as our heel. So the talus and the calcaneus together, if you looked at it from behind, is called the hind foot. So if you're looking at the foot from the back, you can see our calf muscle on top, our Achilles muscle down, or our Achilles tendon down below. And then just below that is our talus locked on top of our calcaneus, making up our hind foot. Here's a really fun fact about me that you'll probably don't know. I actually dislocated my ankle playing basketball in college. I landed on a guy's foot coming down from a rebound, and my ankle went straight into the shape of a golf club. Super painful, super disgusting to look at. However, that's not really the cool part of the story. The cool part is most ankle dislocations, the most common occurrence of dislocation happens where the tibia, the large leg bone, meets the talus. My dislocation was where the talus meets the calcaneus. It's called the subtalar joint because it's right below the talus. Those two bones are not really supposed to slide apart like that. It's super rare, and the doctor said he had never seen it before in his hospital. So I kind of wore that as a badge of honor while I was going through my 3 months of recovery. It actually should have taken a lot longer than 3 months with the way that it appeared. But actually, those two round bones kind of just rolled on top of each other and were easily popped back into place with little to no soft tissue damage. No tears. Just some strains and a small hairline fracture on my talus, which was baffling to both me and the doctor. They said it was because I had sprained my ankle so many times, so many countless times playing soccer, that my body somehow had more malleable soft tissue down there, adapting from all the times I had rolled them. Anyway, I thought that was really cool, and if you look at my ankles today, you'll see a huge difference in the size and shape because of this injury. I'm kind of excited for you guys to come look at my ankles now and just talk to me about my ankles. Anyway, let's go back to the anatomy. The joint where the leg bones meet the talus allows the foot to bend down and also extend up, which is called flexing and extending, or dorsiflexing and plantar flexing. So the subtalar joint is the one that I dislocated just below the actual ankle, which allows the foot to rock from side to side. So the subtalar joint allows the foot to rock side to side, also calling it pronation or supination. Pronation is rolling in towards the middle, and supination is rolling outward. Now, if you look at most ankle sprains, you'll find that supination, or rolling outwards, is the most common type of ankle injury. I'm sure if you've ever rolled your ankle, you almost certainly rolled it outward. And you know what kind of pain that brings if you've ever rolled your ankle. It is close to the amount of pain that I can only imagine comes from bearing a child. Okay, I'm totally kidding. Obviously, I would never go there. But you know what I mean. It's freaking painful. We will talk about the ankle pronation and supination later, so just visualize what that actually is, because it's going to be important when we talk about strengthening the foot. So rolling the ankle inside or outside. Now, moving toward the toes after looking at the hindfoot bones, the hindfoot is connected to a set of 5 tarsal bones that all work together as a group. These bones are super unique in the ways that they fit together. They look kind of like this 3D puzzle, and there are many joints connecting all of these bones. When the foot is twisted in one direction by the muscle of the foot and leg, these bones actually lock together to form a very rigid structure. When they're twisted in the other direction, they become unlocked and allow the foot to conform to whatever surface the foot is contacting. That's nuts, right? So think about that. When you walk and you need rigidity to push off from, the foot can become a solid structure, almost like the spring of that prosthetic leg that we were talking about. And then when the bones unlock, you become more like your foot becomes more like a hand, and it can grip round or even uneven surfaces like rocks or edges, or even when you step on a kid's toy when you're walking to the bathroom in the dark. Nothing more painful than a spike of a tiny Lego on your unprotected flesh of the underside of your foot, right? So these bones, if you look at your hand right now, you have your wrist, and then you have like where the palm of your hand is, the back side of your palm, that would be where all these little tarsal bones are. And then once you go from those 5 bones that are 3D put together, you then have these 5 other bones that are more like fingers. But these fingers are not your toes. These are actually called the metatarsal bones. So think of the metatarsal bones as if you were looking at your hand and you kind of see the first digit of each finger. Well, that's what these metatarsals are, except for they're all within your foot. So they're all combined. They're not quite your toes, but they still have that finger-like structure moving from all of those 3D puzzle-like tarsal bones. The metatarsal bones are 5 little structures that stick out from that. They aren't individualized like in your hand. You can't see them. All you can see are your individual toes. So think of the metatarsal bones as right above the front part of your foot, right above the arch of your foot, connecting to your individual toes. The connections and joints to the metatarsals are actually really quite rigid, so not much movement happens here. And then finally, we make our way all the way to the bones of the toes, which are also called the phalanges. Now, the great toe, which is your big toe, I've never really called it the great toe, but it's actually called the great toe, is like the thumb, and it only has 2 phalanges. Each of the other 4 toes has 3 phalanges. And the joints between all of these little phalanges are called interphalange or IP joints. And these will be important when we discuss the foot strengthening exercises. So think of them as all of these little joints that allow you to ball up your toes like a fist, which some of you might not even be able to control that movement right now because we haven't been asking our feet to do that. But you should be able to ball your toes up like a little fist. There are some people that can manipulate these joints like fingers. So if you lift one toe at a time and bend one toe at a time without moving any of the other toes, if you can do this, you are a very, very special person with great control and strength of your foot muscles. Not a lot of people can do that. Now, the last joint I want to talk about is very important, and I'm leaving it for last for a reason. It's the joint between your midfoot and your forefoot, or the toes. So between the metatarsals and the phalanges, where all your little toes are, think of this as the ball of your foot. So you have the toes, you have the metatarsals, and then right in between you have that joint. This is the ball of your foot where the webbing of your foot meets the arch. This is what we call the MTP joint. The MTP joint. And it is super important for healthy gait and movement like walking and running. If something is stuck in this joint, damaged or immobile, this could be the first domino in a catastrophic cascade of imbalances and dysfunction moving up the chain. Crazy that such a tiny part of the body, way down at the bottom of the foot, where most of us never even think about, can have such a huge impact on the quality of our life, on living with less aches and pains, on being able to perform better with more explosive movements, being able to balance and stabilize, having overall efficiency with the way that you move. The big toe, or the great toe, or the hallux, is most important toe for walking, and that MTP joint on the big toe is one of the most common areas for problems in the foot. Later, we're going to discuss how to unlock this joint and help you move better every day with a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball. So that is the skeletal structure of the foot. We also have to think about the soft tissue, right? There's ligaments and there's soft tissue that attaches to bones. So ligaments attach bones to bones. That's important. Most people don't know the difference between ligaments and tendons. Ligaments, bone to bones, while tendons connect muscles to bones. So tendons are muscle to bones, like the tendon that connects your thigh, your quad, to your kneecap. This is why the patella tendon is actually a ligament, because it connects your kneecap to your shin bone. Two bones, bone to bone. So when people talk about their patella tendon, they're actually referring to their patella ligament, and that helps me remember which is which. Ligaments are bone to bones, tendons are muscle to bones. Both of these structures are made up of fine, small material called collagen. The collagen fibers are bundled together to form a rope-like structure that has very, very durable and a strong shape. These tendons and ligaments come in a vast array of sizes and shapes in the body. Some are super strong and super large, holding large body parts together, and others are extremely small, supporting smaller body parts together like fingers or toes or spine. But just like rope, they are all made up of smaller, similar shaped fibers that bundle together to create this strong, resilient structure. The thicker the ligament and tendon, the stronger the structure is. Now, the large Achilles tendon is the most important tendon for walking, running, and jumping. It attaches the calf muscle to the heel bone to allow us to raise up on our toes. So when you do a calf raise, your Achilles tendon is the main part of that structure along with the calf muscles. This is the tendon that some very famous athletes have ruptured. The first two athletes that come to my head are Kobe Bryant and Kevin Durant. And when this tendon snaps, you'll hear it. It's like a gunshot. And the person that ruptures it feels like they've been whacked in the back of the leg with a baseball bat. If you ever see an athlete with no one around them and they all of a sudden just jump, grab the back of their leg and crumble to the floor, looking back to see if anyone hit them, you can almost assume that this is an Achilles injury or rupture. And the recovery for this type of injury is super extensive. Even if you have tons of money to put towards your rehab like these basketball superstars, it could take over a year to get back to normal function and performance. And not only that, but you're also going to have to combat the psychological trauma that comes from being terrified that it's going to snap again. If you step the wrong way and it snaps, boom, and that's in the back of your head always. So sometimes your body heals before your brain does. Any dysfunction with the Achilles tendon could be a huge problem down the line with the way that you walk, creating imbalances up the chain. Now, you also have two tendons on the front and the back of the foot. The tendon on the back attaches from the smaller calf muscle and goes underneath the foot, supporting the arch, while the front tendon attaches to the top of the foot from the shin muscle. Yes, you have a shin muscle. It's called the tibialis anterior, which is why this tendon on the front of why this tendon on the front is called the anterior or front tibial tendon. And this tendon allows us to lift our toes up with our foot towards toes to the nose, if you can kind of visualize that. If we can help to mobilize these two tendons with soft tissue work, we give the foot the ability to move through a larger range of motion up and down, or what we call plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, flex and extend, toes up, toes down. This will be super important in helping us walk, lunge, squat, jump better. At the end of this episode, we will talk about some mobility exercises that help us do all of these things. Now, there are also tendons that run along the tops and bottoms of all 5 toes. The tendons that run along the top of the toes pull the toes up or extend the toes, while the tendons on the bottom of each toe flexes the toes down, like making a fist with your toes. These tendons need love too. So when it comes to strengthening your foot, as well as making your foot more mobile, more like a hand and less like a prosthetic leg spring, which there are pros and cons to being super mobile and pros and cons to being super springy. In this case, these two are opposite of each other when it comes to the foot. Most of the motion in the foot are caused by stronger muscles in the lower leg, whose tendons connect to the foot. So contractions of these muscles in the leg is the main way that we move our feet and to stand, walk, run, or jump. There are tons of smaller muscles in the foot, of course, but these muscles are far less important than, let's say, the muscles of the hand. These muscles do have an effect on the way that our toes work, but I have a theory that because we don't ask these muscles to perform, they slowly atrophy and become weak and unimportant and essentially become shriveled soft tissue compared to what they could have been or could be if we were to exercise them like we do with the muscles of our legs, our chest, our back, our arm muscles. So the lower leg muscles do a lot of the work to control our foot. And it's my theory, and from the people that I follow, that that's because we don't use the muscles of the foot. If we could add just that another element of control and dexterity to our toes and our feet. Now, most of the muscles on the foot are layered on the bottom or the sole of the foot. There they connect to and they move the toes as well as providing padding underneath the sole of the foot. The main nerve to the foot is the tibial nerve. This enters the sole of the foot by running behind the inside bump of the ankle. So if you look at the inside of your ankle, it runs on the inside and then goes underneath. Several other nerves run into the foot as well on the outside of the foot that actually go on the top. So if you look at the outside of your ankle, if it runs out the outside and then right along the top of your foot, these nerves primarily provide sensation to the different areas to the top and the outside edges of the foot. So as you can see, the anatomy of the foot is super, super complex. When everything works together, the foot functions correctly and allows you to walk without pain. But when even just one part of the foot becomes damaged, it can affect the entire balance of the foot in the body. Because we rely on our feet to carry our entire weight across all types of surfaces. So it's easy to see why a stable and painless foot is so important for us to have and strengthen in our daily lives. But what happens when we wear shoes from infancy to adulthood? So let's think about what happens from the moment we can walk. And in some cases, even before that, we have these foot casts that we put on our feet, or as we so casually call them, shoes. Consider what our hands would do if from the moment we could grasp something, we put these big kitchen mittens on them. You know which one I'm talking about. The ones that you pull the hot pans out of the oven with. You can't really use your opposable thumb like you want to, and all of your fingers are going to be smashed and smushed together, creating the shape of a hand, but rendering the amazing dexterity, strength, and mobility of your hand pretty much useless. This is essentially what we are doing with our feet. And this is during a time when our feet are still growing from infancy to adulthood. If we take this to the extremes, we can liken this to when, let's say, the ancient Peruvian elite cultures, when they would bind wooden planks to the back of babies' heads so that it would create a flat, elongated, alien-like skull as a mark of social status. Or Asian cultures who bind women's feet from a young age so that in adulthood, their feet can become super petite. This was a Chinese custom of breaking and tightly binding the feet of young girls in order to change the shape and the size of their foot, also considered a status symbol. But let me repeat that. They broke these girls' feet to change the shape. Wow. Or in African tribes where they put rings around and up the neck to help elongate the neck. These are all ways to deform the body from its natural ways of evolving. And we are doing the very same thing to our feet by stuffing them into these cushioned casts. We are deforming our feet from their natural evolutionary shape. Whether we are deforming them in a good way or a bad way, I'll kind of let that be up to you. So after going through all the history of footwear and where it came from, and exploring the evolution of the human foot and dissecting the anatomy of our current foot structure, we are now really getting to the full, real reason for this episode, and the real reasons why I preach about building stronger feet, and why I personally decided to transition from the footwear that I had worn all my entire life to the minimalist shoe, or even better yet, simply going barefoot as much as possible. And I guess when it's socially acceptable to live like a wild jungle child. Putting a shoe on your foot is a form of a cast. Now, it's temporary. You can obviously take it off whenever you want, but it is a cast. If you have ever worn a cast on a broken body part, hard or soft cast, you know exactly what over time that's going to do to that body part. Your muscles atrophy and become weaker and more brittle. Your control over that body part is lowered or even lost, depending on the amount of time in a cast. Check this out. A doctor friend of mine was telling me a story about how he slashed open the top of his hand, cutting with a knife, cutting vegetables, and he cut the tendons to his pointer finger. But they also bound his middle finger to hold it in place when they casted it. So when he cut the tendons to his pointer finger and he got a cast, they not only immobilized his pointer finger, but they also bound his middle finger to it as well to hold it in place. Now, even though his middle finger was completely fine, it was totally unaffected. Because it had been bound to the pointer finger and casted for a multiple month period, he lost full range of motion in his middle finger and had to strengthen it back up the same way he had to strengthen his damaged pointer finger. That's wild, right? Just 2 months of non-use out of his 50 plus years of life made it so that he couldn't ball up his fist. It was incredibly painful to move and bend, even though it was completely healthy. It had just been casted with his damaged finger. The body is a crazy adaptation machine, and it will adapt to whatever you do to it. We are strong, we are resilient, and we can change to survive our environment. But one thing that I'm learning more and more is that this phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it, is more applicable now than we ever know. And if you don't strengthen it, and if you don't train it, our body will assume we don't need it and will prioritize the things that we do strengthen and train. Here's a quick few facts about the foot. Number 1, 1/4 of the bones in your body are in your feet, and they don't completely harden until the age of about 21. 1/4 of your bones in your body don't harden until the age of 21, and you're sitting there molding it into the shape of this shoe. Number 2, your feet have over 8,000 nerve endings, which is one of the reasons why they're so ticklish and so sensitive on most people. However, when they're stuffed inside of a shoe all your life, your brain cannot always process the physical contact sensations correctly, and those neural pathways are weakened and sometimes lost, which is why those farm kids can walk around barefoot on gravel and rocks without a problem, and city kids have a sense of extreme pain because they are not used to those sensations. Yes, of course, skin calluses contribute to the protection as well, but the brain's interpretation of that sensation has a larger role to play than just those few layers of callous skin. Number 3, women have 4 times as many foot problems as men. What are the reasons? Well, high heels and shoes of that nature that contribute to deforming the structure of the foot. And while some men also participate in style over function, it's a much more common thing for females to suffer through foot pain for the sake of style than for men. Number 4, 60% of people have one foot that is bigger than the other. I said 60%, over half. While almost every single person buys a pair of shoes that are identical in size, left and right. So unless you go get your feet measured individually and get custom-made shoes specifically for each foot, which I've never really heard of, you can be sure that one of, if not both of your feet are taking a compromise here when it comes to grabbing the newest pair of Jordans or Louis Vuittons. Number 5, each foot has about 125,000 sweat glands. 125,000. A young adult foot can produce a half pint of sweat on a summer day. A half pint. And we all know the main way that your body controls body temperature as well as releases waste from your body are through the main areas like your armpits, your head, and your feet. When your feet have these sleeves thrown onto them, aka socks, as well as casts molded on top, aka shoes, all of that sweat gets trapped in a perfect environment for bacteria and fungi to thrive. And additionally, your body has a more challenging time regulating your body temperature and removing metabolic waste from your body. The average person, number 6, the average person walks about 150,000 miles in their lifetime. The average person walks about 150,000 miles in their lifetime. That is the equivalent of walking around the entire earth over 5 times. Think about if you have any weakness or improper body mechanics in your gait. What is that going to do up the chain from your ankles to your knees, to your hips and low back and upward and onward? Can you see now why I believe foot health is so important to your overall quality of life? Now, let's briefly discuss some of the most common feet injuries that we see before we close this episode with some great action items and exercises to help us start working on our foot health today. First injury that we see a lot of is tendonitis, mostly tendonitis of the Achilles tendon on the back of your hind foot. This may not be pain that the person feels right away when they start running or walking, but usually after a certain distance or time, they start to feel this aching and pain, and it could persist for multiple days or even weeks after the onset of the painful sensation. This is more of a chronic thing that will nag a recreational athlete until they seek treatment. When it comes to tendonitis or plantar fasciitis, which is the pain on the bottom of the heel and is most common when waking up first thing in the morning and trying to flex your toes upward as you put weight on your foot, I'm going to include a YouTube video on how to fix plantar fasciitis in the description of this episode because it is so common and I get asked about it so much. And I know a bunch of you might be wondering about that, and I'm not going to go into it in depth on this podcast, but I have a video that it'll tell you all about plantar fasciitis, where it comes from, and how to maybe help alleviate some of the pain. And hint, it may have something to do with tight calves. Anything with an itis is an inflammatory issue, and treatment would include something like a natural inflammatory like ice. Ice does a really great job of helping inflammation along with pain. What ice doesn't do well is it doesn't help with blood flow. So you don't want to have ice for a really prolonged period of time, but it is really good for helping with pain as also helping with inflammation. So icing for 15 to 20 minutes after tendonitis flare-up is something that I would say is probably a good idea, and this should help calm down some of the inflammation. And what most athletes do not want to hear is you need to change your physical activity to do something that has less impact, but still a little bit of movement while they wait for the tendon issue to heal. So most runners don't want to hear, hey, stop running. So something that I think that is very helpful is a non-impact machine like a bike or a rower. If you need to get your movement in still and do it without impact. Maybe a barefoot walk on the beach in the shallows of the waves, which will help strengthen and move, but still have not a lot of impact. Or even physical therapy exercises, like if you took a band around your foot and then you did some drawing shapes, or I always did when I sprained my ankle, I put a band around my toes and I wrote the alphabet in capital letters with my ankles and my toes. So I would write capital A, capital B, and I would go all the way from A to Z. And you would hit every single way that you could move your foot, all while having this banded resistance. These are all great ways to help strengthen while not putting extra impact on the tendons and ligaments. Now, speaking of plantar fasciitis, a lot of times people will get this arch support to be able to better help their fascia that runs underneath the foot. That's supposed to help the arch of the foot itself. Here's the issue. These orthotics, these arches, these insoles, they're just a crutch that you're going to have to rely on. And after a period of time, you're not going to be able to support the arch of your own foot. Here's what I liken it to. Think of a back brace. Now, I used to work for a moving company, and there was this one guy that wore a back brace the entire day. He would wake up, put his back brace on, put all of his clothes on, and he would go throughout his entire day moving furniture, sitting down to eat lunch, driving the truck to work, all the way until he was at home at night, and he took it off to sit on the couch and relax for the rest of the night. Can you imagine if your back and trunk stabilizers never had to work to protect your torso from injury? Remember, if you don't use it, you lose it. Well, this guy had debilitating back pain and stress from the moment I met him until the moment I stopped working with him. And if I were to guess, I bet he is still dealing with it to this day. So for those of us who wear orthotics, that's exactly what we're doing to our feet. And I'm not attacking you here. I myself did the exact same thing. I grew up wearing soccer cleats and basketball shoes all of my childhood. And these shoes were like pointed and they smashed all my toes together, and my big toe is actually not my longest toe. My second toe is my longest toe. But because I wore these shoes, it like smashed my second toe down to match where my big toe was. I believe they call it a hammer toe, and I'm not super proud of it. So don't look at my feet the next time you see me in bare feet shoes. But anyway, I'm telling you that I had shoes that really messed with my feet. Um, then I progressed to these super cushioned tennis shoes, which I put huge padded orthotics inside of to make it feel like I was walking on pillows. And I literally did this until about like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I was told that this is what you have to do to help support your arches and help alleviate your pain. And yes, guess what? It took away my pain. It was like I was walking on clouds. But that's like smashing my head against the wall for hours and then taking an Excedrin to help with my headache. Sure, the headache is gone, but why don't I just fix the root cause and stop smashing my head against the wall? That seems like a better route to take. And in this case, hitting my head against the wall is just putting bigger and more cushioned orthotics inside of my shoe. When is it going to stop? When I have 5 inches of cushion under my Skechers shoes when I'm 80 years old and I'm bouncing like a trampoline? We got to stop hitting our head, which is the equivalent, to start strengthening our feet with foot exercises, working on being able to attain control of our feet and toes, similar to the way that you can move your hand and your fingers. And in my weirdo hippie-like opinion, going barefoot anytime you have the ability to is the best way to do this. Now, one caveat with orthotics, if you're using them right now, is that you most likely do need them. I'm not taking that away from you at all. And if you rip them off like a Band-Aid, you could actually be doing more harm than good. You have to treat your muscles of your feet as if they just got removed from a 20, 30, 40-year cast. They will be weak, and this is going to be a very long, slow journey of strengthening them back up to where you don't need to use the orthotics or arch supports anymore. So don't listen to this and immediately take your orthotics out and just start walking barefoot. That would be a really, really bad thing to do. Transitioning out of your orthotics too fast can most definitely create more problems if you don't do it right. I'm going to include resources in the description of this podcast for ways to strengthen. And then also, just if you want to go even deeper, I'm going to include some books to read on how to best transition if you decide you want to go the route of the barefoot. Just a few more common injuries before we move on from that topic. Another common injury to the feet are stress fractures. This can occur anywhere and to any of the bones in the foot. But most common place to get a stress fracture is in the front of the foot, and more specifically on the second metatarsal just behind the ball of the foot. So those long finger-like structures that aren't the toes but right before the toes that connect to those 5 3D pieces of puzzles of bones, those metatarsals can get really, really stressed because they don't have it's rigid there. So that's usually where the most of runners will find that they get the stress fractures. When runners increase their mileage or change the surface of what they're running on, they may have pain in the foot that just isn't getting better. And that's when you should really consider getting it checked for an x-ray for a stress fracture. Now, doctors usually prescribe rest from the activity that caused that stress fracture. And they may even put a boot on the foot or a soft cast on the foot so that the ankle and the foot can be immobilized, and that way that they can stop the person from doing any further damage while it heals. And I'm obviously not a doctor, so I can't tell you what to do, but I believe that movement is medicine. And I've been through so many injuries where I've rested it completely, and then I've actually moved it while it's recovering, and I've gotten a lot more success from actual movement. So getting your foot to move without pain, in my opinion, can be really helpful with the recovery of this process. So that's why whenever I had foot injuries, I took up swimming. Swimming is a low impact way to help move and strengthen the foot. You can change the technique of your swim to whatever movements you can do with the foot and the ankle that is pain free. I mean, you could also strap yourself into a stationary bike as long as it's not too much pain when you pedal. That's another good option. But swimming is so good because you can use your feet like flippers. You can help a little bit more with the leg muscles while the foot is still repairing. I don't know. I think swimming is a really good way to do it. And you also get the resistance of the water. And then the last injury that I want to talk about, and I may have gotten dozens of these, if not hundreds of these, is an ankle ligament sprain. If you've ever gotten a sprained ankle, you know how painful these can be. This comes from your foot rolling in a certain direction and your ligaments not being able to support that movement. So the ligaments either get pulled in the form of a sprain or they actually tear. And there is some significant soft tissue damage when there's a tear. It's not fun. If you've ever sprained your ankle lots of times, you'll notice that if you let the injury heal properly and you rehab it the right way with strengthening exercises, eventually your ligaments become much stronger and more resilient, and they become more like rubber band structures with the ability to stretch and bounce back. Sometimes I'll roll my ankle and I'll be like, "Oh my gosh," and then I'll look down and I'll be like, that did not hurt as much as I thought it was going to. And I think it's because those ligaments have been so used to turning and getting sprained like that it's been reinforced. It's like your body is understanding that these types of injuries keep happening, so it prioritizes reinforcement of that area. But if we lock ourselves into these shoes with high ankle support and then depend on the shoe to protect us, those ankle ligaments are no longer needed. And this is another example of the back brace situation that I talked about. Only this time, instead of the back, it's the ankle and the supporting soft tissue around it. So lastly, I'd like to finish this episode on the importance of foot health with some benefits of going barefoot more often. Also, how to start strengthening your feet today and what style of shoes I wear and I recommend. If you want to dive deeper into this topic, my favorite biomechanist is Katy Bowman. You have to follow Katy Bowman. It's spelled Katy space Bowman. She's a self-proclaimed movement nerd. She's awesome. She's very quirky. I just love everything that she talks about. I love listening to her podcast. She's a really fun follow. I'm going to include the link to some of her foot-related podcasts along with her books that she's written about the feet. My favorite book of hers is called Whole Body Barefoot. And if you're considering going down the path to start building stronger feet, I highly recommend diving a little deeper down this rabbit hole and checking Katy Bowman out. Now, whenever we decide to reduce weight and we consult a doctor about reducing our weight, most of them are going to tell you to go for a walk for at least 20 to 30 minutes each day. And I think this is great advice. And we're finding out just how important increasing the amount of time that you walk each day really is. But walking barefoot, in my opinion, and in a lot of health professionals' opinions, this is the best therapy and the best way, hands down, to do your walks, especially if you can do it out in nature, like at a park or in a grassy field or on the beach, or anywhere you can be connected to the earth without too high of a risk of injury to the underside of the foot. Benefits of walking barefoot more often include gradually reducing pain in the ankles, knees, low back, and other parts of the body affected by strengthening the muscles of the lower leg and foot, allowing you to move more biomechanically sound, which reduces the dysfunctional movement that travels up the kinetic chain, causing chronic overuse injuries at that joint. Walking barefoot also allows you to stay within your boundaries. And what I mean by that is actually using your ankle the way it is supposed to be used, as a shock absorber, rather than relying on that huge cushioned heel to protect your foot from the impact of heel striking. This actually allows us to more naturally practice our gait as our bodies are designed, rather than lazily allowing the shoe to protect us, which could come back and bite us with an injury when we one day aren't wearing our shoes for some reason and we decide to do the types of things that we do with these cushioned shoes. Plus, repetitive heel strikes, even with a cushioned heel, can compound stress throughout the joints over time, creating injuries up the chain. Why do you think that we have more hip and knee replacements than we ever have before? Yes, because we have the technology and the surgeon skill, of course, but I believe because the modern day shoe allows you to go way beyond your natural limitations of the body, and then when the shoe is not present and we do the same movement, we damage our skeletal system and soft tissues of those joints. So being barefoot forces you and guides you to stay within your natural ability. Going barefoot also is a way of rebuilding the strength of the muscles, tendons, and ligaments in the arch of the foot to support that arch, which is only going to make us much stronger and perform better overall. Going barefoot also allows us to be able to use the over 8,000 nerve endings in the foot the way that they're supposed to be used. There's so much sensory information that is lost when you place your foot inside of a cushioned shoe. You are no longer receiving information from those nerve endings the way that they are designed. Because if you were to think about it right now, if I said think about the contact of your shoe to the bottom of your foot, you probably haven't thought about that all day long until I just had your mind focus on it just now. But if you were to walk outside, you are constantly thinking about that connection. And that's really important because those neurological connections, those neurons that go all the way from the bottom of your foot to your brain, those need to be strengthened. Those need to be used in order to be strengthened. And if you don't use it, you lose it. Another benefit of barefoot walking is it forces you to slow down and connect to your movement and connect to your environment, allowing you to be more present, giving you the opportunity to also get one of those unconventional health benefits that we discussed in a previous episode regarding grounding and earthing. So you can also connect to the earth. If you didn't catch that episode, go back and listen to episode number 7, Unconventional Practices That Help You Live Longer, of this podcast. Yeah. Also, it improves your balance. Super important as we age to help prevent falls and injuries that could even lead to our death as we get into our senior years. The stronger your feet, the more connection you have to your feet, the more better balance and support you have. This is so, so important. Maybe one of the top ones. And then this one might be a little bit of a stretch, but I actually believe kind of strongly in it. It has also been theorized that if you go barefoot more often, you will get less sick. Hear me out. There's a reason why we want our kids to go out and play as much as possible, not just to get them outside out of our hair for an hour or two, which I totally get, but also to build up their immune system. When you have them go out and play in the dirt, in the mud, it's the same thing. If you go out barefoot, you get exposed to these little microbes and bacteria and viruses that can build immunity in our bodies. So quite possibly could help with our immunity. And I could go on forever, but I'll finish with this one with the list of benefits, and it's stress relief. Think about it. Have you ever just taken your shoes off after a hard day of work and put your feet in the sand or in the water or walked through beautiful soft green grass? There's really no better feeling, especially if your feet have been stuffed into those cramped shoe casts all day. One surefire way to put yourself into a parasympathetic rest and digest state is to give those feet a little outside stress relief therapy. So now that we've gone over the benefits and you understand why it's so important, I bet you want to go barefoot, right? But Katie Bowman recommends in her book that before you transition to barefoot shoes, you really need to change your mechanics. You need to start strengthening your feet and your lower leg muscles first. Once these exercises have been done for a certain period of time, which will be super individualized based on where you're at right now and the strength or the weakness of your feet, but once you have that, then and only then should you start to transition to barefoot footwear. Consider the back brace analogy. If I wore a back brace for 30 years and then I was like, nah, no more. I'm going to take this thing off. I'm going to do this on my own. And then I took it off and I tried to deadlift 300 pounds. You could see where that might go wrong. The same thing applies to your feet. If you wear supported shoes all your life and then all of a sudden go buy some barefoot shoes or decide to go barefoot running for like 3 miles, you're going to be in a load of trouble and a load of pain at the end of that run. This is going to require baby steps. You see what I did there? Pun intended, baby steps. So I want to list off a few foot exercises you can start off with, and these can be done while sitting and watching TV, while sitting at your desk for work, while sitting in the park with your shoes off. There's literally no excuses not to do these exercises. And I'm only going to briefly describe them because it's going to be hard for me to talk about them. I'm going to link some YouTube videos for you to watch because just talking them over a podcast definitely won't be sufficient as watching this video and following along to learn how. And now these will all be very difficult at first. You may not even be able to move your foot in the way that they're asking, and it might be frustrating. You're like, my foot doesn't even do that movement. And that's because you haven't asked the foot to do these moves, like probably ever. So be patient with yourself. Start slow and progress slowly, and it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time, but it is going to be worth it, I promise you. So exercises that you can do for your feet include, number 1 is called short foot. Short foot is strengthening the arch of your foot by trying to make your foot as short as possible. So if you put your foot flat on the ground and you tried to make your toes draw back towards your heel, this is not the same thing as balling up your toes like a fist. This is actually lifting up the arch of your foot by making your foot shorter and taller and trying to squeeze that arch and hold that position for reps. So watch the YouTube video for short foot, or just Google short foot exercises and you'll find it. Number 2, tiptoe squats. Now, we were taught from the day we started doing squats to squat with our weight in our heels and our toes are light. Heavy heels, light toes. But if you want to strengthen the muscles of the underfoot and the toes, you can do assisted squats with a TRX strap or holding onto a door frame or the back of a chair and doing tippy toe squats. So it's exactly as it sounds. You're up on your tippy toes and then you're dropping down into a squat. Now, this is going to put a much larger demand on the front of your thighs or your quads, which in turn is going to ask your knee to help out more than a normal squat. So if you have any knee issues at all, you have to be super careful with this one. Another thing that you could do is tiptoe holds. So if you go up onto your tiptoes and hold as long as you can, maybe only helping with your balance a little bit with a door or something, that's a really great strengthener. And if you want to take it to the next level, place a tennis ball in between your two heels. Squeeze the tennis ball in between your two heels and do calf raises or tippy toe holds with that tennis ball in between your ankles. What this does is it doesn't allow your ankles to roll in or out, and you have to go straight up, and it is such a good foot strengthener. You have to do this one. So tippy toe squats, tippy toe holds, or even add a tennis ball in between your ankles. Number 3, towel or newspaper crumplers. Yeah, it's exactly as it sounds. You take a towel and you flatten it out all the way, and then you start with your toes on one end of the towel. Your feet never leave the ground, and then you start to crumple that towel and bring that towel all the way into you by grabbing it and pulling it with just your toes. And you could do this with a newspaper or a t-shirt or really anything flat that you can like crumple up. It's the same thing as if you look at your hand and you do like those grip strengtheners where you squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. This is just like that with your toes. Number 4 is MTP joint mobilization with a tennis or lacrosse ball. Remember the MTP joint that I said was so important on, especially on your big toe? It's the ball of your foot. So if you can take a tennis ball, this is such a good one. Take a tennis ball, place it right on the spot behind your big toe and to the right of your pinky. If you take your pinky toe and just underneath of it, right where that metatarsal is, the 5th metatarsal, you can place pressure on that and you can relieve some, give a little space to those joints. You need to place the ball in the right spots though, so I won't try to explain this too much, but think of it as self-myofascial release of the muscles of the underside of your foot, as well as a way to find space in the important joints like the balls of your foot, in order to find a better range of motion so we don't run into those common foot and ankle injuries that we discussed. So take a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball, or even if you want to be kind of evil, you could do a golf ball, which might be a little too small and hard, but try it out. And you can add pressure in the right areas to give you a foot massage on the underside of your foot. You could do this from a seated, or if you want to make it a little more challenging, from a standing position. And obviously, I'm going to include a link for all of these exercises to watch on YouTube, because describing them on a podcast and actually seeing them and following along with them are two different things. And then you have to really think about the importance of your ankle mobility. If your ankle is tight and stiff and immobile, then either the joint above or the joints below have to help out. And that's going to cause issues when they're not meant to do that type of movement. So my top 3 ankle mobility exercises are the combat stretch, the soleus stretch, and then deep squat rocks. So you're in a deep squat and you rock left to right, forward and back. But you really won't know what these are until you search them on YouTube. So combat, C-O-M-B-A-T, find that combat stretch, or soleus stretch, where you put your foot up on a bench, you keep your foot flat, and then you push your knee as far forward as you can, and you kind of pull yourself into the bench. Just search soleus, S-O-L-E-U-S, bench stretch or something like that, and you'll find it. And then I'm going to finish it up here by telling you about the style of shoe that I wear and that I recommend. Minimal footwear means footwear that disrupts your full body movement, your gait, as little as possible. So minimal footwear disrupts your full body movement, your gait as little as possible. And the shoes that I wear are Vivo barefoot shoes. VIVO BAREFOOT shoes. Vivo barefoot shoes. This is what I wear. You can buy some that look identical to normal shoes, but without all that cushion. And my favorite part is that they have this huge, wide toe box to give your toes space to spread. Super important. Now, if you want to purchase a pair of Vivos, I've included a link in this episode description for a full 25% off your first purchase. So check out the link and grab some Vivos. I love them. I've worn them for years, and they are a great company. Just remember, when you buy your Vivos, ease your way into them. Ease your way into them. Do not wear them as your normal shoe in your everyday life. There are also Vibram 5-toed shoes, and you know about these. These are the ones that the weird guy in the gym wears, where you can see all 5 toes, and it kind of looks like a sock, but not. Now, I've never worn these, and they're definitely more out there when it comes to the looks department, but I've heard that they actually are really great for functionality and for when you're transitioning to barefoot. But I just can't quite go as far to wear shoes that have toes on them. I'm not there yet. And then flip-flops, right? Flip-flops, I do love flip-flops, but the problem with flip-flops is that it's not attached to your foot. So the tiny micro moves that your shin and your foot have to do in order to keep that flip-flop attached to your foot is not really biomechanically the same gait as if you were walking barefoot. The good thing about flip-flops, though, is that it makes you become just that much more aware of what your foot is doing than when it's inside of a normal shoe. So the best way to wear a flip-flop would be to get the one that actually attaches all the way around your foot. They may not be the most stylish. They may be kind of dorky, but that would be the best type of flip-flop to wear. For now, I wear the ones that, you just slide your foot in, and it helps me be able to just kind of get rid of them so I can walk barefoot more often and say that I have shoes on. But yeah, that's kind of my strategy. Just remember, start doing the exercises first. Strengthen your feet first. Then start walking barefoot on surfaces outside, like outside or in your home or in nature. Do that barefoot first, and then you can purchase minimalist shoes to wear. And you can wear them for like an hour a day for the first week, and then slowly add time to each week. If you are unable to wear minimalist shoes because of your work, maybe it has a dress code, maybe you have to wear protective boots to work, or maybe you have to wear a dress shoe, well, then you could definitely quit your job. Okay, well, maybe that's not the best option for you, but don't worry. If you can't control the times that you work with what shoes you wear, then just don't worry about it. Just worry about the times when you are able to wear the minimalist shoe. There's nothing you can do if your work says you have to wear a certain type of shoe. Now, there's maybe little ways around it, like if you drive a U-Haul truck, or not a U-Haul, FedEx truck, and you have to wear these certain shoes, maybe you can switch them off and take that risk your own, but I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying there's ways around it if you absolutely want to do it. But either way, find a pair of minimalist shoes that fits your dress code. You could do it off of Vivo, or just worry about the hours of the day that you can control. The biggest takeaway for me to you is to just have an awareness of what your foot is doing when you walk. In shoes, out of shoes, downstairs, on uneven terrain, when training, all the time. Have an awareness of your feet. Your feet are your foundation. Your foundation is built on those two crazy bone and ligament-filled structures all the way down, far away from your eyes, brain, and hands, where you spend most of your time focusing. Your feet connect you to the earth, to the ground that we move on, and they are supposed to send very valuable sensory information up to the brain to help us navigate this crazy world. If you suffer from joint aches and pains, if you are unable to do any of the 7 fundamental movements that our body is meant to do, squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, rotate, walk, and run, you must put a little more importance and focus on improving your foot health. So the next time you see me running around in my bare feet, or showing up in flip-flops in the winter, or going off on one of my many huge tangents and rants on how you should focus more on getting your feet stronger, please know that I'm not doing it because I'm some crazy hippie, but rather it's because I've been through the entire process of weakening my feet to a point of danger. rebuilding their strength and dexterity through many, many years of painfully slow exercises and gradual challenges. This is something that means a lot to me, and I have seen the effects that it can have on pain relief, on performance enhancement, and just overall having a more independent lifestyle. And even though this was one of our longest episodes today, I still only just scratched the surface. Please dive down the rabbit hole and go into the description of this episode and explore the many videos and exercises that I have links to on there. Let me know if you have any questions, and make sure you post about your foot strengthening journey and tag me so I can see your progress, I can celebrate your progress, and I can answer any questions that you might have along the way. Best of luck, Dream Team, and let's take this first step in the right direction of improving our foot health and in turn, improving our overall quality of life. All right, Dream Team, that's it for today. Please share with me any knowledge, thoughts, or questions you may have on today's topic. I'll make sure to answer and discuss on the next episode. You can ask your questions in the comments section or message me on any of the social media platforms. Also, I would be so thankful if you shared this episode with any of your friends or family that may be able to benefit from today's podcast. I would love it if you could do me a solid and screenshot this podcast and share it on your social media platforms and just write one takeaway, one aha moment that you got from this episode. This will help me know what's really valuable to you, and so I can keep the good information coming. And it also lets your network know if this podcast is worth a listen to them. Thank you so much for listening and learning here with us on the Living the Dream podcast. We are so grateful for you being a part of this lifelong learning journey. If you have any topics you'd like to discuss, please let us know in the comments or by messaging me on Instagram at CoachDamian_SD. Be kind to someone today. Smile at someone today, and leave every person you come into contact with better than before. Until next time, friends, keep living the dream.